What is up, world? It's your boy Ton, and you are listening to the Wonton Wealth Podcast. Here, I'm going to unravel anything and everything commercial real estate related. And more importantly, we're going to add abundant value. So if you're ready, buckle up your eardrums. Well, welcome back, everybody. Today I have the author, or actually I should say the co-author of the book, The Go-Giver, which is my favorite book. If you guys listen to previous episodes, I did an episode on each of one of the laws within the book. I cannot recommend this book enough to anybody. So we have the pleasure of having Bob Burg here today with us. Once again, the co-author of The Go-Giver. Bob, aside from that, could you give us a little bit of background on yourself? And from there, maybe a little short synopsis of what the story entails.
Sure. My background is I began in broadcasting, first in radio sports and then television news. Was not very good at it, and I shortly graduated into sales. And I had no formal sales experience, so I flunked, or I should say floundered for the first few months. And then I went into a bookstore one day looking for something, I didn't know what. And this is about 40 years ago now. So unlike today, this kind of material, unless you knew about it, you didn't know about it, right? So I didn't know what I was even looking for. Fortunately, I saw a couple of books. One was by Tom Hopkins and one was by Zig Ziglar, two of the legends in the sales space. And just looking at their titles, it gave me hope because I had no idea there was actually a methodology to selling. And so I took the books home, and I like to say I didn't read them. I devoured them. And what I would do is I'd get home after work every day, and into the wee hours of the night, I'd be reading and studying and highlighting and underlining and practicing. And, and within a few weeks, my sales really began to go through the roof. And the interesting thing about that was there was really no difference in me from 3 weeks earlier, other than now I had a methodology, a system, if you will. And I personally define a system as the process of predictably achieving a goal based on a logical and specific set of how-to principles. The key being predictability. If it's been proven that by doing A, you'll get the desired results of B, then you know that all you need to do is A and continue to do A and continue to do A, and you'll get the desired results of B. So, I could work with that. And from that point, I just started immersing myself in any sales books, or back then it was audio tapes, that I could get my hands on. I started going to all these seminars. But the biggest thing probably was understanding that it wasn't just the how-to of sales, which is very important, but it was more than that. It was really building yourself on the inside. And so I started getting all the books, the How to Win Friends and Influence People, and The Magic of Thinking Big and Think and Grow Rich, and The Greatest Salesman in the World by Og Mandino, and The Richest Man in Babylon, and all the Psycho-Cybernetics, all these great books that were building me on the inside. And I came to really quickly discover that success is really an inside job. It manifests itself outwardly, but it begins in here, in the head, and works its way down to the heart, and you start becoming that person who is able to be successful because of who you're becoming in the process. And so, that to me was, again, very, very inspiring. And, eventually I worked my way up to sales manager of another company years later, and then started teaching what was working for me, and yada, 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 as they used to say on Seinfeld. Here I am years later, and we're having this great conversation.
Love that. Love that. Okay. So you've devoured a lot of these books. Which one of those really stood out to you? And spoiler alert, you can't say all of them. Which one
Well,
really stood out, and which one is still your favorite, today?
it's hard to say because, even the books themselves covered different areas, And so you've got a How to Win Friends and Influence People that was all about people skills, which was so very important. You had a Think and Grow Rich that was really in your mind, understanding what it really took to get that kind of success. You had a Psycho-Cybernetics, which was the first book that taught me that we all see the world through a belief system, a set of beliefs we're not even aware we have, and that you can never attain more than your most limiting beliefs, right? So there's all these different books that cover different topics, and that you read at different times of your life. And then you might read it again 5 years later, 10 years later. It's a whole different book because you're a whole different person. So I couldn't really say what my favorite of all time is, because there's just so many that have made such a significant difference in my life.
Gotcha. So for the Go Giver in and of itself, how did you get inspired to tell the business ideas, which are the five laws within the of stratospheric success within the book, into this parable?
Yeah. So back in the 90s, the mid 90s, or I guess 1994, my first major book was published. It was called Endless Referrals. The subtitle was Network Your Everyday Contacts into Sales. And it was a how-to book. It was for the entrepreneur or salesperson who knew they had a great product or service. They knew it brought lots of value to their customers and clients, but they didn't necessarily feel comfortable or confident going into their local communities and building the type of relationships that would cause people to feel good about them and want to do business with them directly, and or refer them to others. So that was really my system that I wrote about. The basic premise was that all things being equal, people will do business with and refer business to those people they know, like, and trust. And that's, I guess, sort of been my mantra for however many years, right? Uh, and so it sold well, but it was a how-to book, and I'd always enjoyed reading parables, starting with Ogmandinos and Classens, and then doctors Blanchard and Johnson, and today you have all these great parables out there. I still love reading them, but I thought, wouldn't it be great if we could take the basic idea of endless referrals and put it into a parable? But I knew that was writing a work of fiction was out of my strength zone. Fortunately, in the early 2000s, I met John David Mann, who was the editor in chief of a magazine I was writing for. And even back then, he had a great reputation uh, as a fantastic writer. He's also a great guy, a very high character. And, I brought this idea to him, a very roughly sketched out idea. I'm very rough. For this idea called the Go Giver, because it was all about shifting your focus from getting to providing immense value to others and building the relationships and so forth. But again, just very sketchy. And John fortunately said yes. He was the lead writer, lead storyteller. I mean, without him, this book would have been nothing. And it took a few months to really put it together. Our agent started submitting it to publishing houses. But here's the thing: the writing part was the easiest part, because we over the course of the next year, we got turned down by 24 New York publishing houses before the 25th one said yes. That happened to be Portfolio, which is a imprint of Penguin Random House, and they turned out to be the perfect publishing partner. But 24 before that said no. So it's like any kind of sales, right? You still get a lot more no's than you get yeses. But that was really how that came up. So and it's more than just endless referrals in story form, because John brought a lot to the table as a great entrepreneur himself, and so forth. So, but it really is all about that shift in focus. And Joe, the main character in the story, kind of went through a transformation, because he was very much a go taker. It was all about Joe at the beginning, right? It was all everybody owed Joe, and it was about Joe's quota. And as we always say, nobody's going to buy from you because you have a quota to meet. No one's going to buy from you because you have a sales goal. Nobody's going to buy from you because you need the money. And nobody's going to buy from you just because you're a really nice human being. They're going to buy from you or do business with you because they believe that they will be better off by doing so than by not doing so. And that's great because it means if you really have that heart for service, if you can really look to discover what that other person needs, wants, desires, if you can make it not about you, but about helping to them to solve their problems and challenges, if you can make it not about yourself, but about moving them closer to happiness, wow, you're going to have yourself a whole lot of what we call personal walking ambassadors.
And I think that's what really hit for me, being able to follow the main the main actor in the story and learning and seeing his changes throughout or his
Yeah,
revelations, if you will, throughout
thank you.
all of the five laws really hits home for me. And I guess I might be just one of those that hates reading. Shocking enough, because I've actually read a lot of books, but I guess prior to that, reading was like a chore for me, and I hated reading. And the other piece of it could have been that they were all academic papers. So pretty
Yeah.
dry in and of itself, to where, when you're implementing some of these lessons within a story, it becomes that much easier to read and also that much easier to absorb and put action into those lessons. Another question that I had for you was, I guess, which of those five laws within the Go Giver do you believe is the hardest for people to or
Oh,
adapt and or adopt, and why?
yeah. Well, that's actually a pretty easy one because the feedback we have gotten since the book's been out, it's law number 5, the law of receptivity. Okay. And it's tough for people because, first of all, the law of receptivity, which says the key to effective giving is to stay open to receiving, it basically simply means understanding that, yeah, you breathe out, but you also have to breathe in. It's not one or the other. It's not an either or. It's an and. It's both. You breathe out carbon dioxide. You breathe in oxygen. You breathe out, which is giving of value. You breathe in, which is receiving of value. Giving and receiving are not opposite concepts. They are two sides of the very same coin, and they work in tandem. The challenge is the world around us does not give us that message. The world around us gives us a very, very negative anti-prosperity message. And we get it from, basically, for most people, from, combination of upbringing, environment, schooling, news media, television shows, movies, social media. We see it everywhere, right? Very negative messaging in terms of prosperity, abundance, money, business, and that can get into someone's head, and not only into their conscious, but more insidiously their unconscious, and they start resisting the good that they have earned, and it's really too bad. It's too bad that the world uh, feels it necessary to give that message, but it does. And so that's why I'm a big believer in making a conscious study of prosperity. And while that chapter, I know opened a lot of people's eyes because people told us it did, we only cover it on a surface level. I mean, there are many people, people like Randy Gage and the late Bob Proctor. You got Sharon Lechter and Ellen Rogan and Lisa Peterson, Ken Honda, David Nagel. I mean, just great people who they speak, they write, they post, they blog, they teach on prosperity. And my feeling is subscribe to these people, read their books, read their blogs, watch their videos, because we get so much anti-prosperity garbage from the world around us that comes into our heads and makes its way into our hearts, unfortunately, that we need to constantly be studying the pro prosperity, the pro abundance messaging that's also out there.
I love that. I love that. So, for anyone who has not read The Go Giver, and they just want, like, if they got a summary on it, it's about giving, right, instead of getting. How do
Well,
you?
let's visit that, and I apologize for interrupting because
Oh,
I
you're
think
fine.
when we say it's about giving, not getting, let's look at it a little differently. First, when we say giving, we've got to really kind of understand what we mean. It's not just doing good deeds. I mean, that's fine. Good deeds are great in and of themselves, but that's not a business strategy. We're talking about finding ways. When we say giving, we're talking about finding ways of providing immense value to others. Then you're going to say, well, what do you mean by value? Isn't that price? No, not at all. Price is a dollar figure. Price is a dollar amount. It's finite. It is what it is. Value is the relative worth or desirability of a thing, of something, to that end user or beholder. What is it about this thing, this product, service, concept, idea, assistance, help, knowledge, what have you? What is it about this thing that provides so much worth or value to another person that they will willingly engage with you, that they will buy from you, that they will refer to you, that they, what have you, okay? And value, which again is relative, value is always in the eyes of the beholder. It's not what we think is of value about what we do or about our service. It's not what we think they should think is of value. It's what they believe is of value. So we need to be able to ask the right questions, and we need to discover what it is that, how they relate to the value, how what we provide ties into helping them accomplish what they want. Okay, so it's about giving in that way, and regarding getting, we'd say receiving, and that's also important, right? So
Love
it's
it. Yeah.
both being able, it's being able to give, but the focus is on the giving, okay? And as John and I say in the second book in the series, Go Givers Sell More, money is simply an echo of value. It's the thunder, if you will, to value's lightning, which means the focus must be on the value you're providing that other person, right? The money you receive is simply a natural result of the value you provide. So it's about giving great value as that other person understands that value to be, and it's about receiving in abundance, but understanding that the receiving is the result of the value that you've given.
I love that. So if, let's say, a person practices go giving of value to pretty much everybody around them, whether it be business, in their lives, etc., how do they avoid continuously doing that and being taken advantage of?
So one thing that's really important, because that's a great question. One thing that's very important to understand is that there is nothing about being a go-giver that is congruent with being anyone's doormat or a martyr or self-sacrificial in any way. So just because you're focusing on providing value to others doesn't mean that you're going to allow people to walk all over you, right? So it's always important to, and of course, the people you want to attract into your life are those people who understand and recognize the value you're providing, and are willing to pay you and happy to pay you for that.
So the other party that's receiving the value has to be worthy of receiving that value too, versus you trying to add value to everybody in the world that you see.
Yeah, well, so it's like this. I mean, you always, when you can add value to others, add value to others. That's great, and you do it without attachment to the result. But you also understand that to the degree you plant these seeds of great will, and you're focused on the people in terms of your marketing strategy. Sure, you're focused on those people who need, want, can afford, what have you. What you offer. So you're nice, you're kind to everyone, okay? But yeah, you're not. Again, it's not just a matter of doing good deeds for people and thinking that's going to come back. No, you are strategically focused on providing value to those who are more likely to want to be in your world and to either do business with you directly, refer you to others. But again, you don't do it with an attachment
Correct.
to that. Okay, you do it because that's just what you're doing. It's who you are, so it's what you do. And you understand that when you do this, you're creating that benevolent context for success. Why? And not for any magical, mystical reasons. It's because those people who are benefiting from the value you're providing, they feel great about you. They see value in doing business with you or recommending you, introducing you to those they care about.
Love that. Can you share an example of someone who has dramatically changed their lives or their business after applying the laws of go giving?
Yeah. So one of my favorite stories was soon after the book came out, and this was in the 2008 financial crisis that hit. And this guy wrote to us through email. He was a roofer. He had a roof repair company in the greater Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania area. And when the financial crisis hit, he, like all of his competitors in the area, they all took a big hit. It's not that people didn't need their roofs repaired or need new roofs. It was that they didn't want to put that kind of money out in the after the economy had crashed, and especially not knowing if they were when they were going to be reimbursed by the insurance company and the whole bit. So they just couldn't, as far as they were concerned, they were too scared to put out the money for it. So at first he did what everybody else did in his profession, and that was try to give the least value and still try to make as much as they could and the whole bit and what have you. And of course that's a struggle to do that. And so what he did, he read the book and he said, okay, I'm going about this backwards. He goes, I need to find a way to add more value. Now, more value doesn't mean you have to spend more money, but it does take thought to say, okay, how do I do this? How can I create this additional value? And what he did, and I thought this was quite brilliant, he made a study of how the insurance companies reimbursed the people who had their roofs done. And what he would do, and he figured it out. And so what he would do now is he would either knock on the doors or make calls with people he knew had roof, that needed repairs. He wouldn't ask, "Do you need your roof repaired?" He knew they did. That wasn't the issue. But what he'd say is, I will navigate. I will help you navigate. I will guide you through getting the money that you're owed from your home insurance company, getting the most amount that you're entitled to in the least amount of time with the least amount of aggravation. Business just went crazy, and he
That's
became
incredible.
known as that person who could write. That's adding
Incredible.
value. That's exactly what we're talking about.
Incredible. So, in your opinion, how has the go giver philosophy aged in today's, call it fast paced and tech driven marketplace?
Yeah, principles stay the same. Universal laws and principles don't change. Strategies can change. Techniques, tactics, they can all change, and go when you have more technology. I think the technology aspect's great because if you utilize it correctly, it just allows you to reach people that you wouldn't have normally ever been able to reach, and to be able to create a relationship with that person. But again, the key is not seeing the technology as the end itself, right? It's not going to replace you, and it's not going to replace the human touch. When you use it correctly, you can do it in order to help accentuate the human touch. And so, so I love the technology aspect whenever it's used appropriately. The challenge is sometimes it's not, and people really think that a bot is going to, but people don't do business with and refer business to computers or robots, or they do business with and refer business to those people they know, like, and trust.
Very true. Very true. Now, what has been a moment in your life that you've had to remind yourself to live by the go giver laws?
Well, I would say the biggest time was years before we even wrote the book, and this is when I was still in sales, and I've always been in sales, but back before I had my business, my speaking business, and I was selling for a company, and I was in a slump, and and I'd been in sales for probably a few years by that time, and I had gotten into a sales slump and was not able to get out of it. And my focus became very much on getting out of the slump, which means what? I was focused on myself, not focused on my customers or prospects. And I remember there was a guy at the company where I worked. He was not in the sales department. I think he was an engineer or something. He was an older guy. I think he retired soon after. And he was the kind of guy, he didn't say much, but whenever he did, it was always something profound. And he fortunately saw me, I think, as sort of Joe, like I would write about with John David Mann years later, that kind of up and coming, young, ambitious, aggressive, sales guy whose focus just was not on the right place. Had a lot of potential, but whose focus was not on the right place. And he said to me, Burg, he was a last name kind of guy. He said, Burg, can I give you some advice? And I said, yeah, please do. I need it. And he said, if you want to make a lot of money in sales, he said, don't have making money as your target. Your target is serving others. Now, when you hit the target, he said, you'll get a reward, and that reward will come in the form of money. And you can do with that money whatever you choose. But never forget, he said, the money is simply the reward for hitting the target. It's not the target itself. Your target is serving others. And what that really said to me, what that said to me was that great salesmanship is never about the salesperson, right? Great salesmanship is never about the product or service, as important as that is, and it is. It's never ever what it's about. Great salesmanship is about the value you're adding to another person's life. Or I guess even more accurately, we could say it's about another person's life being better just because you are part of it. And I think that when we approach sales from that foundational premise, just like when we approach leadership that way or any kind of relationship building that way, I think we're really 9 steps ahead of the game in a 10-step game.
I absolutely love that. Now, looking forward a little bit, maybe, if you could add a sixth law today to the 5 laws of stratospheric success, what would be the sixth law?
Ooh, that's a great question. I would have to say that it would be understanding human nature. It would be to make a study of human nature. Because when you think of it, we're always dealing with human beings, and human beings, not, I've spent the last 40 years, I think, trying to understand human nature, trying to understand other people, trying to understand myself, right? And so because we are we are always dealing with other people, I think the study of human nature and really getting to the core of what drives, what motivates people. Now, of course, everyone's an individual, so people are motivated and driven by different things. But there are certain elements of human nature, those general psychological characteristics, feelings, and behavioral traits that are human, that all humans have. When we understand that, we are then able to notice and identify patterns, right? And when we can do that, that just really puts us a step up. So I would say if there was going to be a sixth law, that's what it would probably be.
I absolutely, absolutely love that. And that's pretty much all the questions I had for you today, Bob. Once again, my absolute favorite book. It's something that I recommend to everyone because I think there is literally a $1 billion lesson, if not more, within the book and the 5 laws in and of itself. So, Bob, before you leave us, could you give them a handoff on where to find you and how do they get their hands on the Go Giver and some of the cool stuff that you're kind of doing in the behind the works at the moment?
Thank you. Well, if they go to Burg, BURG.com, they'll pretty much find everything there. They can subscribe to my daily impact email that I send. They can read a chapter or two of any of the books to see if they like them. They can also look at our Go Giver Academy, which holds our Go Giver Success Vault. And so there's a lot of fun things to look at and explore. And if something looks good to you, check it out.
Love that. Thank you, Bob. Hopefully, you guys got a lot of value from Bob today, as well as dissecting some of the Go Giver principles there. And I will catch you guys again next time. Bob, thanks again. That was awesome. I loved everything. I love the meat behind everything that you kind of painted for us. How you learned all these principles and how it came into the parable in and of itself. Riveting for me.
Well, thank you for having me. I enjoyed myself immensely. Thank you.
Thank you as well. You have a good one. And that's a wrap. If you've made it this far, that means you've listened to the entire episode, so thank you. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, please leave a review on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you're listening from. And if you've learned something or found it useful, share it with one of your homies. And if you want to get in touch with me, I'm pretty active on IG. My handle is pro_TANH. Reach out, let me know what you liked, what you didn't like, or what you want to hear about in the future. I'm here to tailor this to you. Until next time.